Good morning, everybody. How are you all going? I heard it was a late night last night on some work at council.
Makes it sound like we were ripping it.
Well, there's your chance to correct my impression. I had a late night with Ross as well. So
They were very different.
Look, thank you for being here this morning. I understand you've got a full day, and we have actually a very good agenda. And I just want to thank staff, Patricia. I think probably Andrew and Rhiannon. There are probably a bunch of other staff members that have contributed significantly to this agenda, and it's substantially encouraging the way it's developing, and my appreciation for that. But we do want to make reasonably quick moves, just given what's in front of us. Before I indicate the agenda, because there are a couple of changes I'd like to make, do we have any apologies? We have one from Tom, who I think's already gone up to Kimagoi or is on his way. Do we have any other apologies? Evelyn is not going to be here, so we should note Evelyn. Is anybody else that we should be named? Okay, well, I'll move from the chair that we sustain those apologies. Do I have a seconder, please? Thanks, Rangi. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, it's carried. Is there any matters in front of us for today's agenda that you need to note your interests? There being none, that's fine. I'll go to public forum. There's hadn't been informed of any, Patricia, Michael, Malavika, so we will move on. Just to indicate a small change, hopefully we've got Chris on the line. Have we, Malavika? Chris Janae? Can you just, I'd just like to hurry him along, because we were keen to change our agenda so we could accommodate Chris, which would be fine. Assuming Chris comes on board while I just deal with the agenda. Look, it's good that Chris is with us. We've got a couple of items, and I propose to take those first. And in fact, at your request, Nobby, we'll deal with the fee proposal first, because you need to shoot through in about 10 minutes for a while. Then we will deal with the update on the annual report. Then I'll go back to item 4, which is the minutes, and we will keep going through. Partly through my lateness, I'm actually going to remove the item, which is a review of the performance and the effectiveness of the Audit and Risk Committee. I prepared some papers, but for technical reasons, they weren't uploaded as anticipated on Thursday morning, and I would rather we dealt with this more properly. So I'm going to suggest that we hold that over until the next meeting, so that you folk have a chance to see what I've written. So apart from that, I think that is the proposed agenda. We'll break at 10 o'clock for what I understand is hot scones and butter. I don't know which is the dominant ingredient in that feed. And a cup of tea and a lunch at 12 noon. And I anticipate we will have finished our meeting by then. So perhaps I should just move a motion that we confirm the agenda in the order that I've said. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Leslie. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, it's carried. Thanks a lot. Right, any sign of Chris at this stage, Malavika? Can we move on to item 4, which is the confirmation of the agenda? I'll put the motion that we adopt this true and correct record. Do I have a second? Thank you, Darren. Are there any matters of accuracy or completeness that people need to raise? Look pretty good to me. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, it's carried. I noticed there were a few action items on it, but well done to staff, Patricia and team. I think they're all picked up in the course of our agenda, so that's really neat. Thank you. They were primarily around the risk maturity, around the health and safety, and also around our annual report. So that's great and encouraging. So that gets me back to waiting for Chris, who we haven't. Oh no, we've got him. G'day, Chris. How are you? You need to take your microphone off and show us your face, please, Chris. Brilliant. G'day, Chris. How are you?
I'm still on mute.
While Chris is just waiting to get his microphone up and running, as suggested, let's deal with item 7, which is the audit fee proposal, which is what I'd like to deal with first. So obviously, Patricia, you'll lead off, and then I'll ask Chris to speak to his letter. Chris, you're with us now, are you? We can hear you. Can you say hi? No, we can't hear you, mate, and I can't see your microphone off. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay, Patricia, we'll let Chris do his thing while you carry on, please.
Okay, so this is the audit fee proposal, which should be for a 3-year period. This is a little unusual in that the fee being proposed by Chris for this audit is only for the 2023 audit only, allowing us to have a look at what it actually really takes to complete the audit of the ICC group. As those that have been around this table for a number of years know, there has been a significant increase in the number of hours required to complete the audit. And the last 2 audits have been somewhat complex, and a number of different issues have been dealt with during that. And this also coincides with the COVID period, where audits went from being very much more face-to-face on site to being off-site and remote, which has had added some additional complexities to the audit process. So what Chris is proposing here, and hopefully he'll get his microphone working shortly. What he's proposing is that there's a significant increase, though when we look at the breakdown that's been provided in the proposal letter, a big chunk of that is actually the increase in the hourly cost of the auditors. And that was a significant increase. They set their audit fees out for 3 years, so the inflationary pressures on the audit operation mean there's a significant increase in that charge out rate required. The proposal, after we take the proposed discount that we've got to, is pretty much in line with what we actually paid for last year's fee after the overruns. So this is us saying, let's see if this is the right case. We'd have a number of hours that we're working to. Chris and I are working very closely about managing to those hours, and this is what we think is reasonable. What is a little unusual is the proposal to re-baseline after the audit's been completed, so that we can have a look at the number of hours spent and then talk with fellow councils of similar size and complexity as us, as into how many hours their audit teams are spending, and seeing if there's anything that we can do better to make a more efficient process for both the audit team and ourselves. Now, hopefully I see Chris back on screen. So do we have microphone yet, Chris?
Chris, if you have a chance to speak, I'd be welcome to. I'll invite you to speak to your letter, please.
Can you hear me?
Yep. You there, Chris?
You can hear me now?
No, I can't hear you.
Very faint.
Very faint.
Can't hear you at all, literally. I can hear that you're speaking, but not clearly. Are we able to increase the volume on this?
That's it, has he?
My end.
That seems like it's a Bluetooth issue.
Right, are we not there, are we, Chris?
I can hear you really well, but I'm not sure you can hear me.
I can only hear you faintly. I can hear you now better. How are the rest of the committee?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we will be extremely quiet, Chris. If you could continue with what you want to say, please.
I'll try and speak with some volume if I can. Look, thanks, Bruce, and good morning, everyone. Apologies for my technology. As Patricia's outlined, the audit proposal letter is in your packs. Largely take that as read. The purpose of the letter is, unsurprisingly, to outline the fees and hours for the contract period. Probably some highlights that are in there really is, yes, it is a 1-year fee only, as Patricia's outlined, and that's because of the level of uncertainty around the hours, given the previous history, which is also outlined there. So you'll see in some comparative information, it shows previous audit hours have been between 2,000 and 2,700 hours over the last 3 years or so. So yes, we've proposed a 1-year fee only, and using an open book exercise to understand the hours better, which will be part of a two-way conversation in terms of the analysis of those hours and what it looks like for out years. The fee is a significant increase, as Patricia's paper mentions. The context for that is in the letter, and I think we discussed quite a bit of that at the last committee, talking around previous fee setting parameters before COVID, and audit fees not keeping pace with the cost to complete audits. Equally, increased complexity and scope of audits since that time. New standards, increasing expectations of standard setters and regulators. And that was even leading into COVID when fees needed to rise. However, there was a pause put on at that point, given the impact of costs on communities, similar to what you would have done yourself with your rates. So we paused those fees through COVID. That cost pressure hasn't changed, and obviously we've seen quite a highly inflationary environment since then. So this is the point at which we're trying to get to rebaselining that and getting to what is a reasonable fee both for ourselves and for you. The hours components of the increase are included on page 34. They're also in Patricia's table in a cover letter. Again, these are primarily pointing towards increased areas of complexity around accounting issues such as ICL, evaluations, and even matters concerning the group consolidation. We're bringing in some new standards there, both auditing and reporting, some quality review requirements, and obviously that level of rebaselining. The cost impact of those matters is also shown on page 37. And as Patricia rightly outlined, a significant proportion of that increase is in relation to charge out rate movements and the previous fee capping. So the impact of keeping the same scope and putting in the same amount of hours as we'd had in previous audit proposals results in itself as $73,000 of the increase. You'll also see in there a proposed discount to the audit fee from its cost recovery position. That's just really because we're cognizant of the magnitude of the increase we're proposing here and just trying to lessen it as much as we can on 2023, recognising the remaining increase is obviously still quite significant. I think that's probably all I wanted to cover, Bruce, but happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chris, and appreciate that we can hear you now and that you're with us. That's great. Darren, you've got a question.
Thanks, Chair. Not a question, but a comment. And it's probably the first time in at least 3 years that it's going to be a positive one. We know we've had challenges with audit over the recent years, and quite clearly you've heard Council's concern about the increase in fees. But this is, I think, a really good response, and that you're prepared to work with us and test things with rigour and take that year for some comparisons. Good luck in finding another council of our size and complexity, Patricia. But I think it's a very reasonable approach, and so I just wanted to say thank you for it.
Thanks for that comment, Darren. Rangi, then Nobby.
My question, I guess, is a standard procurement question. That obviously we are procuring services to do this, and obviously this council, Audit New Zealand, is not the only provider for this. Is that right?
I think you have to look at this slightly differently, Rangi, which is this is not a standard procurement process.
I'm not saying it's standard, but it is a procurement process.
Sorry, yes and no, because by the Public Audit Act, our auditor is the Auditor General, full stop.
Right.
There is no choice in that. So this is the Auditor General enabling, and admittedly this is where you're getting closer to the alternates, to a provider providing that work. This is a fee that's effectively set by the Auditor General, not by Audit New Zealand.
Right.
Okay, so it's the Auditor General that is essentially setting this fee. In fact, that's one of the reasons it's been late, I understand it, Chris, is that these fees have all been approved and moderated by the Auditor General effectively himself.
Okay, so when it comes to the amount of hours required, now in any service provider, people can do it quickly, they can do it slowly, they can do it 100 different ways. So how do we know, that's what I'm getting at.
Good point, good question, yep.
Is that the provider is providing the best value for the hourly, per hour. Like, I mean, you know yourself, if you Ross is an accountant, so I mean, people have their own accountants and they normally stick with them because it makes sense. There comes a point that even any business will go, hey, this is not right. We need to do a review because it doesn't feel right.
Thanks, Rangi. So, I think the key question is actually, how do we know this is the right number of hours? So, what's happened, and I probably would invite you, Patricia, as well as you, Chris. How do we know this is the right number of hours, given it's such a key determinant of the total overall cost?
So from my perspective, I looked at it based on the number of hours that was actually spent last year and going, we probably spent too many hours in certain areas to bring it back. I have had some off-the-record conversations with colleagues around the country about roughly what their audit hours are to go, this is looking at about that, knowing some of the complexities at other councils. But I'll pass over to Chris because he may be better placed to sort of answer that question, Rangi.
Chris?
Yep, I'm happy to take that. I think two very sensible responses there, Patricia. I take comfort from the moderation process and the hours of similar audits. Equally, I think, we're cognizant the comparative hours, and you'll see them in all their you'll see them in all their glory, or I shouldn't say glory, but you know what I mean, in the letter there. And we're trying to take the inefficiencies out of there and set what is a reasonable set of hours for an audit, and that takes into account efficiency. So a lot of time has gone into going over those past costs and pulling out what is effectively an efficient time and looking at the base. I think part of your question as well, Rangi, was around scope. I mean, at the end of the day, we're set to a level of what's a minimum under audit standards, but that is driven by a risk assessment. So more risk, more work; less risk, less work. We're being heavily challenged at the moment around our risk assessments to ensure that we are pulling those down to an appropriate manner, and it's not in my interest or my team's interest to do any unnecessary work either. So in terms of the scope question, there's a lot of challenge going in there to making sure we're doing the right amount of work. I think from an efficiency angle, that's a shared responsibility, and that's something that Patricia's team and my team have been putting a lot of effort into, ensuring that there's good preparation from yourselves and good execution from ourselves as well. So there's a lot in there, but certainly a focus on trying to keep it to what is a good, reasonable, efficient audit.
No, thanks, Chris.
Appreciate that. Nobby, and then Grant.
Apologies, I need to be away in about 5 minutes. Just to reflect that I've had some discussions with Chris and Patricia and Michael internally as well about the fee structures going forward. It's a little bit eye-watering that within a 2-year period we're going up 100,000 one year and another 100,000 potentially next year as well, because we don't have the 3-year forecast. And so when I look at the reasons that are driving that up, I see two things: one that we can't control and one that we should be making some noise on. The one we can't control is the price of auditors, and we probably can't, as part of that, go beyond what the Auditor General is determining are the new schedule of work that needs to be looked at. But it doesn't seem logical to me that this whole process is cost plus. I've done quite a bit of audit work in the government sector, and there comes a time when, instead of just saying we've got 1,500 hours here and the AG says next year we want another 200 hours, and there's another bit of work and another bit of work and another bit of work, and you end up with 2,500 hours. Sometimes in the public sector, the mindset is, look, if we've done some basic work back here year on year on year and we've found little or nothing, we start to put that aside. And what that does is it still ends up being 1,500 or 1,600 hours, but it doesn't mean it keeps adding on every single year as the flavour of the AG decides that there's more work than we need to be doing, because the industry just keeps building. And the amounts in there are eye-watering, that between 1 year that we've gone up 61% on budget. I mean, we can't run an organisation that way. We wouldn't allow any contractor to do that to us. And I think Rangi was alluding to the contract stuff, and it's all very well for the Auditor General to say, well, you've got to deal with Audit New Zealand, and there's no disrespect to Chris because he's been really positive. But there are other options. And I guess it's a little bit of a closed field in some ways, I think. Now, I know the advice I'm getting is that Deloitte, who are also in the picture, are also experiencing the same sort of costs as well. So we're probably not getting away from it, but it's whether we need to do everything back in the background. If you had 5 years of checking, I don't know, accounts payable or accounts receivable or something like that, and you find no faults or no potential risks at all, then why wouldn't you just de-risk that so that you can incorporate other work that you bring in? And I guess that's probably a big picture issue beyond today's paper, I guess. But
Well, I
and
wonder
I know local government New Zealand are looking to that.
Yeah.
Because they're feeling the pinch on the cost as well.
I suspect the Auditor General has got lots of letters, if not potentially out of the conference there being some move with the Auditor General about its fees. I wonder if I could just make a comment on that though, no, because I wanted to pick up on your point before Grant and then Leslie. I think I've got on order here. One of the things, Chris, that you have said, or rather has been highlighted by you, Patricia, and page 28 of our agenda, is that we will treat this. What I'm really saying is Chris has put us on performance because we paid an extra $95,000 for our last audit, essentially in part because of our level of performance, or quite frankly non-performance. Or we could have done better performance to minimise cost. Let's try and find the right around it, plus some of the challenge of things like accounting for ICL. And so what I'm seeing here is actually a challenge. Let's keep our noses clean, and that's our next paper, when we have a good report from Patricia about how we can have confidence that we can deliver so that Chris can do his work. But what I do notice here, Chris, is a commitment to an open book exercise in the lead up to that 24-25. And I'd like to put a time boundedness on that open book exercise being reviewed. And after our first meeting after the 31st of October, I would like us to have that open book analysis on the audit. And I think it needs a level of nuance, not just these were the hours, therefore these must be the hours next year. That's not open book.
Yeah.
Again, if I'm going back to your good point, Rangi, that actually an open book with a contractor is not just, well, these are the hours. I want to understand why they are the hours. So Patricia and Chris, unless you guys want to make more comment, I would like that to be an effective discussion in our first meeting. So it's probably, quite frankly, it's probably December, whatever the first one is. I can't remember my dates, past adoption of the accounts. But we need to sit down around a table and we can work out whether that's workshop or whether that's it's somewhere. It's got to come back to an open meeting. We have that open book exercise and understand why they are where they are. So Nobby, we come back to your point. Why are these areas focused on? Why are they risky? I think we have a right, without overstressing that as a right, we have a need to understand why the scope of the exercise of the audit takes its length. So I'd like to just note that. But sorry, Grant, and then Leslie.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So just on page 31, recent cost history, the estimates on budgeted heirs versus actual heirs, who's done those estimates historically?
So historically, they're done by audit.
By the auditor.
I do believe, and Chris will confirm, that those estimates would be put together by his team and then moderated by the Auditor General.
Right. Okay. So
Budget.
So therefore, what
The budget, yes.
So therefore, what confidence can we get that the 1,500 heirs this time is accurate? And if you're confident that it's accurate, then what can you issue us with a fixed price contract, i.e., whatever the heirs are, the price stays the same? And then that puts, to the Chair's point, a bit of pressure back on Audit New Zealand around the fact that, you know, you're saying you've done a robust discovery of what heirs are required. That's good. We'll take a fixed price contract. So irrespective of the heirs in an open book review, the price is the price. Because otherwise there's no accountability. We can't go to the market and tender it because it's a monopoly. And the only confidence we can get that Audit New Zealand is being effective in terms of the use of their time is that they put the skin in the game around a fixed price contract. And that would be my view on the only way we can bring discipline from their end to us.
Thanks, Ryan. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My slightly different view is that I was going to comment that this is a a pragmatic approach, which is refreshing after last year. And it is offering, as Patricia's pointed out in the covering piece, to use the 2023 audit to re-baseline what is required. And I actually think we need that. We have definitely got to the point where we need that re-baseline to happen. In that way, I see this as a pragmatic way of getting a much better result for the future. So I'm tending to think that the best thing is to go forward with this, be very serious about that rebaselining, as you've pointed out, Mr. Chair, and hopefully get the 3-year agreed figure, or have a rebaseline that we can use to approach one of the other big companies.
Can I ask? Thank you for that, Leslie. Appreciate it. Any other questions? Sir, I've got a couple of questions. Yes, Ross.
Again, I think it's pragmatic, and speaking anecdotally with other local authorities or audit and risk committee members around the country, they have seen similar percentage increases. They've also seen theirs set for 3 years with rather large increases year on year. So I think we're fortunate that we've got a good approach looking at this year and then going forward. In respect to a fixed price, I don't think you'd find a professional service advisor willing to do that without some really strict scope, because you'll have what's in scope and then what's out of scope, and no audit, as I said last year, runs smoothly. So there will always be some argument about what else is there. So I think this is a good base for this year, and we should move forward on that.
Right, thank you for that. Just a couple of questions. So in some sense, Chris, there's a sense of incentivisation here. You really want to charge $80,000 above what the proposed fee is for the current year, correct? All being equal, you would be charging us something in the order of $340,000, I think, correct?
That's the fee on a cost recovery basis.
On a cost recovery basis, okay. So bottom line is that we have the incentive, we perform, you perform, and it's sorry, I should have a number in front of me, 262 or something or thereabouts, $1,000. That becomes cemented in as the baseline, not the 360, correct? Or 340, correct?
This is about a smoothing increase. So the discount agreed through negotiation there is a smoothing process. So that possibly could change in out years, to be discussed.
Right. So we are ultimately signing up to 340 plus inflation in the out years. You're just
not necessarily. That's part of our discussion for next year.
Right.
Following the open book exercise.
I just think we need to tie this down. And my view is that actually we do it right, etc. The baseline is set at 262. Chris, one other thing, and it's slightly picky, in your letter, I was a wee bit disappointed with the additional cost, and I would be interested to know if you had a view on what additional cost was, because we requested the audit is done on site. Has the audit approach changed that we wouldn't do it on site? Oh. That's on page 36, where it says the increase in proposed disbursements reflects the audit team performing more on-site work this year at your request.
That is probably a question to me,
is it?
Chair.
Okay.
That is my request. So last year we had very little staff involvement on site. A lot of it was done remotely and it wasn't done face to face. So that was felt to be one of the reasons for a lot of miscommunication between the audit team and the council finance team, because it was being done by email rather than a conversation. We have requested that there be more continuous on-site presence from the audit team through the audit, so that we can get that cadence of how back in my day it would have not been done by email, it would have been done face to face, and there are some nuances being missed as a result of communication by emails that we wanted to cut out. So it's just trying to work out. I recognise that it's costing slightly more, but Chris and I have had some discussions about how we can get the most effective use out of having people on site versus off.
So, in slight increase in disbursements for improved quality and efficiency in the actual audit, so therefore the hours fees down. I get that. Leslie?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I do remember quite clearly that very point being raised several times last year, and my own experience from the health sector of on-site auditors would say that it is always a preference. We've got used to doing many things electronically and by Zoom and email and so forth, but in the audit case, I think there's a huge lot of advantages in the on-site communication happening, and I've seen it with other audits.
Thank you, Leslie. Yes, possibly final comment, Rangi.
Oh, look, just a final comment is to support Grant's comments about the fixed price. Recently, council passed a fixed price contract, like pretty eye-watering amount, and that was done. And we did it all the time, and I can't see what is so mystical and magical about doing an audit. Sorry. I think it's getting sort of a bit blown out of proportion on how sort of complex it is, really, and so I'm totally agreeable to a fixed price if that was ever achievable.
We've had the arguments from Ross. I wonder if we're getting to the point now where somebody might be prepared to move the motions that are here. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Darren. Right, is there any further debate, or will I put that motion? Okay, I'll put the motion then. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Grant? You will record your... Okay, Grant. So the motion is passed. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you, Chris. And why don't we just move to the next one, because I would like to make some, by the way, very positive comments about Chris, but I think they come up with the next one as well. So let's move to the annual report update, which is what item, wherever the previous item was. Thanks, Patricia. I suspect it's in your hands again.
It's in my hands. So this is very much an update of where we are with the annual report preparation. I actually managed to leave my pro forma sitting up at the top table. So there is a pro forma in existence. The team are busy working through some of those key timeframes. We have a very detailed project plan that we're working to. You've got the key milestone dates there. We are tracking to those at the moment, but we're probably I wanted to focus the team. So there are already 2 audits that have been underway, and if not pretty close to being finished. In fact, we started auditing before the end of the financial year on some of the smaller entities. And the next ones, the first of the big ones is the airport company. That will come in a couple of weeks. So the team are very busy getting ready for those. Chris and his team have been in for a couple of weeks during the start of June to do the interim, and actually because there's still some pieces that haven't been finished, and given the time pressure, there is no report from Chris on that the findings from that interim audit will be wrapped into the final audit. But the team did actually make some start on what would be testing that would normally been done during the main audit period. So we were working together about how we could most efficiently use the audit staff that they had and our staff availability at the time. So we've actually advanced some things that would typically be left towards the end of the audit and brought them forward, which was really good to work through. But the key issues is probably what we need to discuss. So as typically at the moment, the valuation of property, plant and equipment will be an issue. We have made the call that we will be valuing roading again, even though we only valued it last year. The significant cost increases within basically the whole infrastructure sector are still there. So by revaluing roading, we don't have to revalue any other classes, so we'll be doing that. What will be a key issue and is still an emerging issue is how we will be treating the investment in and the loan to ICL. There's some technical accounting issues that the team are working through, and we're working really closely with Chris and his team on that. The other key issue, and it's always an issue, is the timely receipt of finalised reports from all the subsidiaries. Not all the subsidiaries are within my direct control. So we are reliant on other audit firms, so it's not all even with Chris, with Audit New Zealand, actually completing on time. And if they are late, it will cause pressure on us and can pressure on Chris's team to receive those signed off reports from subsidiaries, and the consolidation is impacted as a result. So that we are trying to manage as best we can, but a complicated group structure is not helpful if we do not have more than 50%, but we still need to bring in those numbers. We don't tend to have that much sway. The other one, which is an issue that emerged last year in relation to the change in water standards regulations, we have some number of key Department of Internal Affairs dictated performance measures in relation to our drinking water standards, but they've changed, but we're still required to have those performance measures. So last year we required a third party consultant to give an opinion about our compliance with those. We need to again this year, but there's not very clear guidance to the sector yet about what they actually need to give an opinion on. And we sort of need this opinion in the next 3 weeks. We've made a call about what we think that is, but there's a risk that central government may, or the DIA may change that unless something's happened in the last couple of days. From Chris can give an update. It is an issue that the whole sector is facing, or those with drinking water. But
thanks for that, Patricia. Chris, is any comments from your side in terms of the progress of the 23 audit? Chris, welcome your comments.
Thanks for the update, Patricia. That's good there. I think probably I'll just talk to the key matters. I think in terms of the interim audit, the context there in terms of the work that we're looking to complete is in relation to one area, and our IT auditors who are currently doing their work at the moment. They look at all the back end of everything and do all their IT work, so I'm hoping to have that shortly. In terms of those key issues there, I think the first thing to say is they are the right ones, which should give you some comfort until they are the right ones from my perspective. Sorry, I'm just going to cough for a second. And I think that last one's probably worth mentioning. So the drinking water standards assessment there is the case of having 2 sets of rules for 1 year. Unfortunately, a performance measure is based on the first set of rules, and that performance measure is dictated by a set of rules issued by the DIA. They've yet to be updated to see what happens after November. There's a level of logic to what that measure could be, given you've reported on it previously, but yes, that scope's really important in terms of determining what your expert can look at, and ultimately how we can use that expert's work to get assurance over drinking water quality measures.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, do we have comments from folk at all on the committee? Just a couple of questions from me, probably your way, Patricia. How developed is that pro forma? I know it's sitting here. I haven't gone across the reach for it. It is
very well developed. I didn't share it because it's through 100 and nearly 200 pages, and a lot of the commentary still needs to be updated as we're going through. But we are getting well through it. It's pretty much a drop.
My comment at the last meeting, Patricia, was actually, in a sense, a chance for the committee to see something early, and I did use the word pro forma. To the extent that it would presumably show us the tenor of how we're going to report, particularly the front end. Appreciating numbers won't necessarily be there, etc. So I'm not overly worried, but what I am concerned about is that the committee has a chance in a timely fashion to be able to provide comment on a relatively draft set of accounts, because otherwise if we see it the week before we're due to adopt, we're not going to make any changes even if they should be credibly done, because actually we want to get the darn thing out of the way. So just looking at your timetable on page 23, when is the chance for the committee to have that sort of pro forma view and provide you with comments.
So that was at the next meeting on the 19th of September.
Okay, good. That's fine then. We'll do it then. That's what I need to know. Look, and the other question was actually, and you touched on the subsidiaries, and you've got a list there on page 24. Possibly this is, well, to both of you, some of those are more equal than others in terms of their impact on our group results. And I suspect that we have in the past had accounts signed off with some unaudited entries as well as some audited entries. Is that going to happen again this year?
Based on progress to date, I'm not expecting that. I'm expecting them all to come through. The risk is actually coming out of the ICHL group because they are the more material subsidiaries. Yes. Council's direct ones are perhaps not as material.
And you have assurances that ICHL will deliver on time?
I have.
Right. And Chris, I suspect you're the auditor, are you?
Yes, for ICHL Airport.
Brilliant. Okay, right. So we need to make certain that I see you smiling there, Andrew. Is there any comment you want to make, Cover?
I will make one comment, and this is probably not fair to Chris, so I don't really expect an answer, but it touches on some of the issues that have been raised, particularly around who the auditor is, and I accept the comments around the complexity in ICL and the difficulty that is causing for Audit New Zealand. The point that we would probably flag is that there might be an auditor, if that could be delegated out, there might be an auditor that would solve some of that complexity, and I think that's, as I said, Chris, it's without notice, so I don't really expect an answer, but I think that's something that all the parties should consider. We're getting some complexity down in the holding company group that is testing the commercial sensibility of Audit New Zealand that might deserve some consideration of an external auditor.
Well, I think that reflects the previous item where we talked about the open book exercise. It should be across the group and not just the parent entities. So thanks for that comment, Andrew. Just one other question I had, which was in terms of efficiency, Patricia. I haven't had it done, and so I can't comment on its efficiency, but indexation versus full revaluation of roads, is indexation a quicker way to get this done?
Yes.
And are you indexing?
Yes.
Ah, okay, right.
And we'll probably index in one of the subsidiaries as well. So yeah, so indexation is much quicker. We'll work closely with the audit team because this is a new approach for us.
Yep.
And making sure that we cross all our T's and dot our I's on that.
Cracker. Oh, that's great. Thank you. Grant?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So just to pick up on Andrew's point, what is the opportunity to actually bring an external person in with more commercial acumen, for want of a better term, to enable that ICHL audit to be completed on time? Because I agree with you, that's the thing that's probably going to trip us up. So I'd be interested to get some comment on that from Chris.
I think actually Andrew tried to say that simply that it's probably unfair to ask Chris to comment on that at this stage.
Okay, so I'll reframe it. When would we get a response from Chris around the opportunity to do that?
Well, I think I was reflecting that would be at the time we do the open book exercise, after the audit.
Would it be too late?
Well, I think we are past balance date now. We are in a process where we've got to get the audit done. We're not going to change horses now, I don't think, which would be the an implication. So from what Andrew has said.
Has the process of auditing ICHL actually started?
Can't tell you.
Yes,
Chris?
It has.
It has started?
It has started.
Yeah.
Okay, and then second question, just with respect to the revaluation of roading, that's due to the fact that because of the change in, the perceived change in value, there's a material impact on balance sheet, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It will also have an impact on our depreciation.
Yeah, that's right.
Those parts of the roads that are depreciable, Grant, as well.
Yeah, that's right, and that's what I was thinking. It actually creates
rates pressure is what it comes back to.
Creates an issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a circular issue, yes.
Yeah, it's a problem, isn't it? In inflationary periods, we actually...
And it has material impact on rates.
You've got it, absolutely, yeah.
So it's something...
Yeah, absolutely. So it's something to be worried about. Certainly, and that will obviously, as you well know, play out in the long-term plan.
Yeah, that's right.
Look, I'm going to move that we pass these resolutions. Can I just make, in so doing, a brief comment, which is I'm encouraged by the conversation, including your comments, Grant and Andrew, that actually we've got a robust relationship now with our auditor in a way that, quite frankly, we didn't have last year. And I'm comfortable that actually we both enable Patricia and support her in the plans that we have got to deliver our part of the story. But I also want to say that I've also had the chance to meet with Chris a couple of times, and I am much encouraged by the way he is approaching the issues that we face, and we've dealt with those in this paper. So I'm positive. I think right at the start, Darren, you might have started with the fee one, saying, you know, there's something positive here. I want to reflect that my engagement with Chris as our auditor has been positive to date, and I'm looking forward to ensure we continue that in light of that to see it work. So I'm very keen that we do that. So look, I've moved the motion that we do all those three things. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Grant. You'll second. Any other discussion? Being none, I'll put all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? It's carried. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Chris. You're welcome to stay if you wish, but otherwise we'll let you get on with the busy day that no doubt you have, Chris. So it's great to have you here.
I'll pop away. Thanks very much, though.
Thanks, Chris. Catch you
Good
later,
day.
mate.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Can I move now to item 5, please, which is the customer complaint? Rhiannon, is this going to be comments from you?
Joe.
Or Joe?
Joe and Hannah are going to speak to this one.
Thank you, Rhiannon. G'day, Joe. How are you?
Good, thank you. Oh, we've got snacks.
Speaking of long stay.
Tanakoto. The customer complaints policy will look to provide consistency across the organisation, so that there's a transparency to the process for everybody involved. It will also look to highlight opportunities to enhance the customer experience through continuous improvement. For each complaint, a complaint liaison will be appointed to that incident so that the customer will have the one person to deal with and will have an understanding from both parties within set timeframes. So we'd like to invite any questions.
Thanks, Joe. Right, comments from folk. Yes, Grant.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So just with respect to recent events through Splash Palace, would that scenario have come through this complaints process? Is that what you're sort of thinking?
Give Hannah an opportunity.
Kia ora. So I'm the policy analyst here, so that's my involvement in this. The thinking is part of this process has been to understand what a complaint is and is not. So a lot of things that are raised that come through our various services are actually dealt with there and then.
Yeah.
It's when that cannot be resolved immediately or there's an ongoing problem, then it will be escalated to a complaint. So it will depend on the specific circumstances, but there's a helpful chart on page 3 of the report, which is hopefully gives a bit of an indication of how we deal with various incidents, but they'll be very circumstance specific.
Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, further comment that it's important both for the public, but equally for staff, that they feel supported, that they don't have to deal with an issue that they aren't able to deal with. It's out of their sort of sphere of influence.
Yes. At any time a customer can request it to be a formal complaint.
Yeah.
So for that case, yes, that would have been, and it would have gone into this system.
Yeah.
Because it would be treated as a formal complaint.
Have you tested the process with the say Splash Palace staff to just see if they felt supported around the process that we're proposing?
Not this specifically yet, but part of this will be training, so everyone has a full understanding of where they're at.
Yeah.
We did test a number through this process.
Okay.
And probably the most challenging thing was to identify what is a complaint, because the customer will ring up and go, I'd like to complain my bin hasn't been collected, but we can fix that very quickly. And the first tends to be the call centre that hears most of this first, and they will often say, this is going a bit wrong, and that's where that would then step into the complaint, and it would go through the process with the set timeframes, so everybody again understands the timing around that. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Rangi.
Regarding complaints that are put to elected members, now what is the protocol for an elected member to basically, do you just act as the halfback and feed it out, kick it for touch, or what? What do you do? Do you or do you track down? Does the elected member try and track down the relative person, which is, I don't think is quite fair. No. So it is, where would I go? I've got two sitting in emails that have come in this week.
What we would encourage you to do would be forward that on to customer services. We would then respond to that customer within 2 days, often a little quicker.
What's the email?
Phone in the customer.service@ICC.
Right. Okay.
And that is absolutely the best place. If you can encourage the customer to speak to us directly, we appreciate that, because often we can find out a lot more about that. But yes, just forward that to our main email, and then we will start the process or try and resolve it in the first instance quickly.
I mean, it's good that they see elected members as being a way into council.
Yes, of course.
But we just need to be, we just know, need to know now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
I wonder, look, just following that question up, Rangi, and I appreciate your point. Is that clear in the policy, what an elected member does when they receive a complaint?
To be fair, I don't think it's explained in extreme detail, although again, if you look at that chart
The diagram,
on page 3.
Page 14, yeah.
Yeah, it does say customer contact ICC by any means, and no, I didn't specifically say elected member, but I would say that's part and parcel. So anyone who is part of council can receive a complaint and then pass it on to the correct person.
I would like to suggest that you need to be more clear. Okay, I take the broad assumption, but I think policies sometimes are to clarify the assumptions that we're all probably operating under. Eminently reasonable, it doesn't change it, but I think that would be valuable, that it recognises that this is a system that works for elected members receiving complaints as well as staff.
Yep.
You know, frontline staff would be useful. Any other questions for, yes, Grant?
Yeah, sorry, just one further one. So this then would fit into our risk management framework. So if the complaint was significant, it would then fit into a monitoring management program to come to this.
Yes.
To this committee. Okay. Yep. Cool. Thanks.
Are there any questions actually on the policy? We've made one little comment here, which hopefully is said respectfully. Was there any other questions folk would like to raise? I have a couple, if that's okay, please. If I just started with the diagram, you've got requests for services and you've got complaints, and I mean, I take on board the immediate. I take on board that sort of distinction. What is a resolved immediately if it's not a request for service or a complaint?
Resolved immediately could be the rubbish bin that we talked about, but it goes into the request for service. It could be someone doesn't know how to use the parking kiosk, so we pop outside and actually show them and help them. So it comes to us via many different forms, social media, lots of other ways. So some things it's just literally picking up the phone and you can sort it out very quickly for the customer. When we put the policy together, the biggest work on was what is a request for service and when does it get to the point that actually that person has asked for that 3 times and we still haven't fixed it. And that's where in customer service we will be lodging that as a complaint. So then the complaint liaison can deal directly with that customer to check it is resolved.
Great. And can I be honest, as a cold reader of the policy, I didn't quite get that distinction. I mean, I've made an assumption that a resolved immediately is something which actually doesn't have to really get to the RFS or isn't actually a complaint.
Yes.
But equally, it's not well defined. Can I be honest?
Thank
it's not
you.
well
Yes,
defined.
thank
So I pass that on as a critique, not a criticism.
Thank you.
The other thing then that interests me is actually your description about a formal complaint. And I didn't know what a formal complaint was. Was it one where they have to give us their name and contact details? What actually is a formal complaint?
Do you want to answer?
If I might answer that, Mr. Chair. I think a lot of the confusion issue here is that the word complaint has a colloquial meaning versus the meaning that we want to give it in the policy. And again, we ummed and ahed about exactly what word to use. We tried registered complaint, we tried formal complaint. We settled on complaint, and then we have that section in the policy itself that talks about what is a request for service versus a complaint that is going into this system. The phrasing formal complaint shows up in the cover report. We tried to steer away from it. I don't think we used it in the policy itself. For that reason, the report is trying to sort of speak to that colloquial use of the word complaint. And what we're trying to say is that certain things that are called complaints by the customer won't reach that level, but other things will. So I fully accept that there is slightly confused wording. We've tried to be very consistent in the policy itself and just use the word complaint. But I think the point is that the upshot is the same, that if someone approaches council with an issue, whatever that issue is, it's either going to be resolved immediately, or it's going to result in a request for service, or it's going to result in a complaint that goes into this system. Again, I appreciate there's a little bit of muddying of the wording, but I think the policy is clear enough that that's what we're looking at. And we tried to make this a user-friendly policy and avoid too much jargon, because we assume that members of the public, whilst I trust no one will ever have a complaint against ICC, on the rare occasion that they did, I imagine they would want to read this and understand it. And what we want them to understand is that phone us, and we will deal with it. But if you are told that this doesn't amount to a complaint, that's why. But then there's always the option that someone can say, well, I think this is a complaint and I want you to register it, in which case, fine, we can do that.
I think a critical part, clearly, and Joe, I think you already did, is there's going to be, obviously, in light of adoption of this policy, there's going to be a lot of training. And I think that needs to be clarified. There needs to be a strong understanding about the conventions behind what is a complaint and what is not. I mean, I would point out that you do have a particular section on a formal complaint within the policy, and I didn't understand it, so I just passed it on for what it's worth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, just one other question, and I just want to say to the members, and look, I'm not quite certain whether it's a management or a governance policy. I'm sort of reasonably relaxed, but I just wanted to point members to page 19 of 93, where in fact timeframes are really important, because this is a level of service. And I mean, this is giving rise to the commitment that you've actually guys have given to us. We want to, let's be upfront. If you've got a complaint, we'll resolve it. Here goes the timelines we are self-imposing on ourselves, which, is a question, is that reasonable? I mean, I think it is, but I just want to point that out for members as we consider the resolution, and that's fine. It's interesting, and look, this is me reflecting that sometimes the matters that become, in the way that you're suggesting, Grant, ones that ultimately end up in this committee tend to be more at the vexatious.
Yes.
Potentially vexatious complainant end of the scale, and I wasn't quite certain whether that sort of complaint, where ultimately you might say to a person, we're just not going to deal with you, that doesn't get registered as a complaint.
It would potentially start as a complaint,
right?
And it will be through the system, but there may be a point that we get to where we have to withdraw our interaction with that customer for various reasons. Hopefully that can be restored again if things settle and we can get back into that. But it was really important in this policy that we covered off vexatious, because we haven't had that in writing.
My point, Joe, was I think even if the conclusion of a complaint is that we go through a reasonably formal process of Michael declaring a person is vexatious and we won't deal with them, we still want to have that recorded in our system, so that particularly we can reflect on how many complaints we've got, how we've been able to deal with them effectively, and those which have a problem with them. Thank you for that. I've got Darren and then Rangi.
Thanks. Following on from that, Chair, Hannah or Joe, I'm not sure who wants to have a crack at this, but it's easy to determine the aggressive complaints, but is it potentially subjective, or how do we determine the vexatious / recidivist complainant?
Do you want me to?
I would say part of this is going to be a learning curve as well. We take comfort from the fact that customer services deal with this day in and day out, and they know what a vexatious or recidivist complainant looks like. But we've deliberately built in a shorter review period for this policy, so that within the first year it's going to be fully reviewed to make sure that we're capturing exactly that sort of thing. And that was a very intentional decision in this case.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you.
Add to that as well, we do have some customers that get in touch with us a lot more than others, and that's fine, because often they're letting us know things within our city that needs work, and we record those and we deal with those. It's only really where we may be getting to issues where customers are abusive, etc., that we would have to step in and deal with that. But as Hannah said, this is what customer service do deal with every day. And we're just looking for that opportunity where they can say, we need to help that customer a little bit more. We need to step in. We need to have a liaison who's dealing with them. So the other thing to note as well, when we've spoken to other councils, which we have done a lot of research, when we put this policy in, true complaints, they tend to only get 3 or 4 a month. So I think it will be interesting when we start the policy and do the training to see if people are either sort of over enthusiastic with using it, and if we may need to look at the training again, or how that policy is adopted, because we intend to try and fix absolutely everything, but sometimes, you know, it may, we know, because it's not within our level of service or within that time frame.
Yeah, through you, Chair, I don't think it's any different to what we encounter a lot, and that sometimes we hear from the same people every now and then. It's easy to move into a metaphorical eye roll, but actually every now and then, if you approach from them separately, you've got to go, actually, no, that's a good point.
That's right. And we appreciate that.
Thank you, Darren.
Thank you.
Rangi.
Just to help us, can we have some IT assistance so we can forward emails? At the moment, we can't forward emails to. We can't. Yeah. No.
Okay, well, that can be. I'm sure Rangi dealt with outside the.
Just if we can have that
outside
done,
the meeting. But thank you for that.
Be fantastic.
Hannah and Joe, thank you for that. Do appreciate your this actually, in my experience getting around risk committee, this is a really important area. So I'm grateful for the thought that you folk have put into it, and hopefully our comments add a wee bit to the thinking. But I take it in effect, the resolution is we receive and we note.
Yes.
Essentially, you've outlined that you're now going to work with, train, educate might be the wrong word, work with your staff to be able to implement this policy. So the committee will be very interested to see how it works.
Thank you.
For a bunch of reasons. I go back to what Grant said. At the worst end, it actually it might signal a level of risk. Actually, the other thing that I'm looking for is actually, particularly at a complaints process, we should be a learning organisation, and I think it goes back to your point, Darren. This could be a good point. How do we improve our service to our community? So I'd be very interested to see how it goes. So thank you very much. Do I have a move in a second?
Happy to
for the
move,
motion,
Chair.
please? Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Leslie. I'll put the motions in, please. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, it's carried. Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, you too. It's wonderful. Great to have you here, and Rhiannon as well. I know you were looked like you're ready to speak if you needed to. So there you go. Right, can we move on to the strategic risk section, please? This is a very encouraging report, Andrew, and I'm deeply appreciative that we've got it on the agenda.
Thank you. So I'll take the report as read generally, but I think it's important, and I think it picks up some points from the chair earlier. And a lot of the issues that are coming up and a lot of the issues that have been put before this committee are connecting the dots. And so you see in this and the paper before, there was what was called by the chair continuous improvement, but really it's that second sort of stage of our risk management maturity where we're actually assessing whether or not the controls and measures that we're putting in place are actually being effective and working the way we want them to. And so it's highlighting a little bit like we have done here in the by the material out of ProMap. Where are things outside where you would expect them to be? Where are things not working as you would expect them to? And where are the control effectiveness? Where should you be challenging those? So there's a broad range of those things coming up across the papers today. in terms of this paper in particular, it's just trying to highlight that, and it's something, again, that council laws and this committee should be very on top of, and that's those higher level sort of strategic risks. We tend to get, particularly as staff, we tend to get bogged down in the day-to-day doing and where our operational risks are and where the obvious risks in many respects are, and don't spend enough time or have the ability to step up from that space and have a look at the broader strategic risks and how they might be impacting the decisions we're making, not necessarily immediately, but in that sort of 2, 3, 4, 5 year time frame, and what could or should we be considering now in terms of how we can mitigate the impact, if any, of those risks when they're occurring. This is a follow-on to the paper that went to council around the future for local government, and it's encouraging, even though that there is some work going in that space, and I think the councils are looking at working together in terms of forming a joint approach to how they prepare for that, or look at what that might impact. But it's those sort of big changes that have an impact on the decisions that council needs to make in terms of what we can and should be doing for our community. The other risks that I think are highlighted from the risks identified by the previous council particularly relate to our relationship with other parties and how we need to work on those relationships to ensure that we can achieve things for the community, and how we can work within the broader members and parties within the community that we need to work with to achieve those outcomes. And so it's looking at trying to adjust our risk framework to recognise those strategic level risks and have a conversation, have a language in which we can discuss those. So that's the purpose for today's paper.
Thanks for that, Andrew. Yes, Rangi.
Look, I think it's such a valid point, and that we are entering a consultation period for our LTP, and that really is the time that we look at those strategic points, because we don't want to be consulting with the public willy-nilly. I mean, we need to do it in a controlled formal process, and the LTP allows us to do that. And that three-year gap where we do it, especially when it comes to things like what land are we freeing up for housing, what do we need to do, and things, thinking ahead, it actually puts more importance on the LTP. And previously, in the 12 years I've been on council, the LTP has come along as a bit of a thing, oh, we've got to do it. But it should actually be used as a really aggressive and constructive tool. That's really as governors, that's our piece to use, really. So I really like the work, and that we should actually acknowledge it and actually, as governors, actually really get on board. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Rangi. Any other questions, Darren?
Well, no, just following on from what Rangi was saying, it's right. The LTP has always been important, because if we get that right, then there's no need for an annual going out and revisiting an adjustment, apart from those rare occasions where something phenomenal happens, like a global pandemic, and there's this great almighty reset. But if from a strategic perspective, if we have planned for that 3/10/30 years and done it well, it's good, and part of that process is making sure that we manage those risks. That said, one good series of sunspots that erases everything in every electronic cloud is the next little challenge that we'll face, potentially.
Absolutely. Leslie.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Like the others, I actually think this is very positive. Andrew, just wanted to say on page 42 in the chart, the second risk down, I think that one probably needs to refer to the breakdown of relationships. You've got that risk repeated twice there, and I think the first one is probably referring to the breakdown of relationships rather than the incorrect sharing of information.
Thank you. And when I read these, I took them verbatim from what came from the workshop, and when I looked at them, they will need some tweaking before they come back out as actual risks. So thank you.
Thanks for that, Leslie. Right, Andrew, look, I just got, probably I'm more at the implementation end of this, because I totally agree with Rangi and Darren. This is good stuff. And in fact, if I can make a comment, Rangi, my view is do your hard yards on the LTP, and I take your point. You want to say it should be an aggressive document, progressive in terms of the community. We need to back that then up with an appropriate risk framework behind it to make certain we achieve those objectives, which become really important. Andrew, just look, I take on board. That's actually my first point I was going to make, Leslie, was we've got it twice, although the risk description is different.
Yeah.
One's around communication, the other one is around confidential information. Sorry. One is around effective communication and strategy. The other one is about relationship with stakeholders. So there's a wee bit there. Andrew, just so look, I like all this artifact stuff. I mean, I wasn't directly involved in the creation of the risks. There's 19 of them, for my accounting is correct, that obviously came out of the workshop. My presumption is you're now going to do analysis on that, with a view that there will be, shall we say, a sorting or a sifting of their risk weighting, and those that are sort of extreme high or residual risks are going to be the ones that we'll monitor, right?
Yes, to a certain extent, and I think the other key piece, and it's worth acknowledging, because you do a lot of good work in this space through the long-term plan, but it then gets lost in the long-term plan, and I don't think we ever plan or consider, to your point, the counterfactual if our assumptions prove to be false. And I think particularly where we are forced through the process and through Audit New Zealand to make certain assumptions that staff and yourselves might not even agree with. And yet we don't ever really sit back and say, okay, we've had to assume inflation of 4% or whatever it is, and none of us believe that. Whereas what would that actually be if the counterfactual, which we believe to be the case, proves true, and what would we change? We don't, and that's where the framework lets us build on the work we're currently doing to have a conversation around what is the implication of those risks and where are they currently sitting. So that's might not necessarily be a direct answer to your question, but yes is the answer. We will use the language that we've now got in the framework to have those discussions and put a risk rating on all our assumptions and all the risks that we see, and highlight some of these and what may or may not be happening in these particular spaces, because these are risks that were identified by the previous council. So clearly at that stage we thought to be important that are not currently on our radar as risks that we're managing in a formal sense.
I looked at the risk management framework. One other question, Andrew. On page 44 of 93, under issues and options, strategic risks, wasn't quite certain I could understand that second sentence. The issue that has been identified in the risk identification undertaken is that there is a gap in the identified sources of risks within the framework. Can you just expand on that?
So when you
me,
look
please?
at the descriptions of the risks, we've got a risk category called strategy and policy. When you look at the wording around that, it's really the operational risks of not being able to implement our strategy, rather than the risk that our strategy is incorrect or invalid given the current environment.
It's around the strategy risk,
Yes.
in contrast to strategic risk.
Yes.
Okay, I was thrown out by the title. Got it. That's fine. Which is then why when you come to the table on page 45, it's only dealing with strategy. Gotcha.
Yes.
I understand that now. That's brilliant. I knew the penny would drop. In terms of the review of the risk management policy, I just want to make one question. In your paper, you say you have or are employing a risk officer?
Yes. So Tash, you see behind us, Anderson.
Oh, welcome.
She's
Good
doing
to
a
see
lot
you.
of work in the, and it's in there, a lot of work at this stage around trying to make sure our ability to manage risk so effectively through ProMap and getting ProMap up to speed and useful for why we engaged it. And so, preempting your question, yes, there will be some changes to the titles. And I spoke to Peter Patton about that, and we'll need to tweak some of the descriptions of who's responsible for some of those items.
Yeah, within the policy. Yeah. So thank you. You're in front of me in terms of the game. Who owns the risks?
Yeah, ultimately council, but we have, and so again in the framework, and we're just working through that in the moment in terms of setting it up in ProMap to ensure it reflects our framework. You have people who might have sort of effectively day-to-day management, but ultimately all risks would sit with the council, but there might be people on a day-to-day basis are managing them to within, and this is this risk appetite piece, to within the risk appetite, and what is the escalation if you're not managing it to within the appetite set by council. So that's all within the framework, and we're formalising it within ProMap, so we get those steps to work. And
my shorthand is I'd be expecting owners to come out of the ELT on all our risks.
Oh,
to be honest, and I'd love to see. This is down in the future. I'd love to see names when it goes with it.
And we'll get that out of ProMap.
Yeah, I mean that's. I appreciate we're kicking off here, and this is really good. The other thing that I would just want to make a comment on is the table 4 on page 60 of 93. Again, really good that we're trying to categorise, and it gives rise to what potentially hits this table or hits Michael's ELT table or sits with managers of risk somewhere in the organisation. Only extreme risk goes to the Audit and Risk Committee. I was a wee bit uncertain why it was only extreme risk. I would have expected at least high.
Look, again, happy for some guidance on that. It really, and I think inherent in that is an expectation that if it was high, then there would be strategies put in place to reduce it, and if they couldn't be, then it would clearly be escalated. So it's more around, I think, who puts in place the strategies or who makes the decisions. But again, happy for guidance because we're in the process of setting those escalation steps up formally within the model we've got. So if you would like that to come to risk insurance, happy to make those changes.
Look, I'm not suggesting a change right now, by the way, Andrew. This is just the value of being able to see the documents and have a discussion and think about actually how does it actually apply. And I related that, and I could be conflating two issues with Appendix B, which is the sources of risk and their consequences, which often is also where we start thinking about risk appetite. And the accountant in me went straight to the financial, which in some sense is the easiest one to deal with because it's dealing with dollars. And I was just thinking, a moderate risk consequence of $1 million to $5 million. I suspect if we were running that as a real risk, that might be of interest to this committee. And again, I'm just thinking about actually what is the escalation, albeit that actually, I mean, it would still fit within your framework. You have a risk. We know that it's moderate. If you couldn't bring it within the $1 million to $5 million, well, we probably should be having a discussion. But it will be good, I think, ultimately to get to that end of not only the front end work that you guys are doing really well about actually defining what our strategic risks are and attaching it to our objectives, but actually, as you and I have discussed out offline, the risk appetite, because actually that then starts to create a better sense of what should be in front of this committee on a quarterly basis and what shouldn't. So I appreciate that.
And I think, just briefly to answer that one, I think the difficulty often with looking at those sources of risk is we tend to read them in the without thinking about the likelihood. And so again, financial risks for someone like council are actually quite low when you look at the delegations and all the other controls that are in place. The likelihood makes even $1 million loss for one of the description quite small. So.
Yeah. No, I'm with
but I agree. If it was likely and $1 million, you'd probably see it.
What I found interesting, I just pass this on to members. I was again very interested. Obviously, the work you did with Deloitte's around page 76, and that little somewhat busy diagram on the right-hand side of the page, where their experiences, where probably governors and even managers focus their time versus where the real risk is, and that comes around value creation. And I think that's something, Rangi, if I go back to your original good comments about the long-term plan, we want to focus on in terms of actually what do we do here? It's got to be stuff that creates value, and it's those big risks. So a very interesting little diagram just to read it, and I'm glad we've got that one on board as part of our input to our thinking, which is really good. Okay, folk. I'm risking having a conversation here rather than trying to do business. Are there any other comments, Leslie?
The only other comment I had was similar to yours about the high risk on page 60. I did wonder in that table where it says these risks are to be monitored monthly, whether it perhaps did need to add and maybe escalated to risk and assurance as appropriate or something along those lines. For the high risk, there would be a time at which it seems to me ELT might appropriately make that decision, and it might be good to have it in the table as an option.
Look, again, happy to take on board those comments and make those tweaks. And I suppose, again, it's the beauty of having these conversations. It's getting that agreed approach as much as anything. I mean, we can try and define a lot of things, and we can try and write rules. But if we understand where everyone's coming from, we understand that we're managing to an agreed risk appetite, then these things should flow automatically. It's important to have them recognised in the words, but the conversation will drive that to occur anyway.
Leslie, I again, obviously, Claire, you and I aligned on possibly a question. So on a point, the question on it becomes, where are we going to from here? And I wonder if we just look at the recommendations. In fact, I think it gives the sense, Andrew, you're characterising for us where you want to take us. So if I was to go very slowly through them, we received the report. We note the appropriateness of the current risk management framework, and you've got a couple of comments. You've indicated that you'll change it to get our risk officer and etc. And there'll be some wording changes between that and Peter's role as quality assurance. So that's super fine. We note the increased use of the risk management framework in the development of health and safety risks. So we've seen that there. We'll get a chance to discuss that, to uplift it, and that's giving us an example of it, of good risk management. We recommend that the changes to the current Appendix B to the risk management framework is set out in this report. And I just want to check, that's bringing those 19 defined risks into, no?
No, it's bringing the table on page 44 of board books.
44?
And 45, the descriptions, so that if someone identifies a risk and they go to manage that or go to the framework to see how to manage it, they will have a category in which to assess the consequence.
So that's page 40. That's page 44, which is the likelihood rating.
Yep.
And page 45, which is the source of risk around strategy.
Yep.
Great, got you, because you've made those changes. We note the traditional under-managed strategic risks by the organisation as identified in Deloitte elected member workshop presentation, and perhaps even I've just hinted at one of the key little graphs that reflects their professional view. And we request further report. We request a further report on strategic risks consistent with the newly defined sources of risk and taking into consideration the risks identified in the Deloitte workshop be presented to the next Risk and Assurance Committee meeting. It feels like quite a bit of work, but I take it it's underway, so that's quite achievable from your perspective, Andrew. Brilliant. So this is the starting of the regular strategic risk work that we'll be doing as a committee, which I would want to totally endorse. I think those are the 6 recommendations.
Happy to move.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Darren. Are there any comments on this? It's great work and tremendous. I really am encouraged by it. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried. Sorry, Rangi, did you have your hand up?
Oh, look, it's kind of, unfortunately, it crosses over to public excluded in council. So that's the trouble. We've got topics that fall into this.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that we...
Are you referring to the health and safety report?
No.
Yeah.
No.
So I think that's, can I just say that, thank you for the raising there. I mean, I think this is something which we as we need to, in light of where the Ombudsman goes, in Lagoima, what do we have in public and what do we have in public excluded? My personal view is this isn't the right place, by the way, but we may have to start considering actually what is transacted publicly versus what is not. So, for instance, if I can give some reflection from my committees elsewhere, cyber security is often seen as one of our strategic risks. We never have, we wouldn't discuss cyber security in public, because actually it's not the sort of thing you want to let those that want to break into the system know what you're doing. So we'll need to work that one through. So your point, I want to say, Rangi, is really well made, but we're babes in the wood in terms of where do we discuss strategic risks. So we need to work that one out. I agree. So I think that's a future work on, Andrew. You may have comments. You're also and Michael, you're our legal advisors. You may want to indicate any thoughts on that at this stage. I don't know. No, we'll worry about it as it goes on. That's great. Groovy. So can we go back to the agenda then, please? We're up to item 9, which I've said I'd like to hold over. I did produce a very short 3 or 4 page PowerPoint deck where I put out my thoughts in terms of where the committee's at. For reasons which are possibly technical, it was never uploaded. So look, I would just like to suggest that we hold that over. Gives you a chance to get my views, and then it gives us a chance to have a proper discussion at the next meeting without too much trouble. Could we move then to item 10, which is to move into public excluded for these items and the reason stated. I'll move that from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Leslie. Is there any discussion on what we're taking into public excluded? Comfortable? Good. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, it's carried. Brilliant. I think you've earned a